Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cast of Caw, where we talk all things related to the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. I'm your co-host, Rachel, and joining me is the other half of my quartet, the man who's going to keep us on track tonight and not let me lollygag and conspiratorial theory my way into a 3-hour episode, DJ!
Woo! That's a lot of weight on my shoulders. I don't know if I'm ready to carry that around.
I'm sorry, these are the moments, right? Like, are you a true podcast gunslinger, a podslinger? Like,
Podslinger?
Can you step up to the plate of keeping me on track?
That feels like a slightly evolved monkey who's just throwing something different, right?
Wow. I was picturing something like kind of cool, and you went straight to throwing poop. Oh, DJ, how have you been? What have you been up to? What's going on?
Oh, so, we were talking before the show, but I have been building a nice, very beautiful looking suitcase trap set.
Oh my God, it looks so awesome.
And so over the course of the last, probably month and a half, I've been gathering the parts and was just waiting on one last thing. And I just installed it, and it looks freaking awesome. I packed everything up, and it, in fact, fits in a suitcase. I am cheating, though. One snare drum, I chose to go with a slightly fancier snare drum, and the fancier snare drum does not actually fit in the pack. So
scandalo.
So I'll have to have a backpack with the one snare, but that's fine.
Now I'm picturing you putting out all your drums and then carefully looking both ways, make sure nobody's looking, and then pulling out the illicit snare.
Yeah, hide the backpack inside of the suitcase so you can't see it, and then be like, "Yeah, no, it was all in there. Trust me."
You're gonna have smoke bombs you can throw down. when the smoke clears, the snare has suddenly appeared.
Don't judge me. The snare was in there, I swear.
Prove it wasn't.
Yeah, so that's what I've been up to. What about you?
Let's see. What have I been doing? Last night I did a little guest spot on Trick or Treat Radio, which was a lot of fun. They do a live show, which is always a lot of pressure, but they're really great guys, and we laughed a lot. And we talked about the new Guillermo del Toro film Nightmare Alley, which, if you have not seen it, is beautiful. Mm-hmm. Grim. Ooh, is it dark? But so that I did that last night. We talked it was about a 3-hour show, but we laughed a lot. And if people haven't already checked out Trick or Treat Radio, they definitely should. Those guys are hilarious, and next week is their 500th episode, which is wild. I'm over here patting myself on the back because we're on episode 75. They're on episode 500. I know for you, DJ, as a splattercaster, former splattercaster, that's NBD, but that's a milestone. So, but It was fun. Yeah, it was fun to kind of pre-celebrate with them their big day. What else have I been doing? I was really sick, but nobody wants to hear those gory details. I already made DJ listen to them. That's how you know you're my friend. You sit through all my gory barfing stories.
I mean, I'm actually I'm not an anti-barfer, so when you're telling me the story, I'm just tell me more.
Oh, there's more. Maybe on the bonus episode, I'll get into the truly gory details. There's a little tease for you patrons. Actually, this is actually a good chance to tease that. Organically unplanned, and probably should have been planned, but I'm, I guess, not that good at podcasting. We have our bonus episode coming out. We're recording next weekend. Is that right?
Question mark, exclamation point.
Yeah, it's the 26th. Yeah, that's next weekend.
Okay.
And it's going to be you, myself, Ariel, and Matilda are going to be reviewing Stephen King's magnum opus, Maximum Overdrive.
I didn't realize that Stephen King actually directed that.
Oh, yeah. I think it's the only thing he ever directed.
Yeah, and so Matt posted an article in the Dead Lantern chat that just happened to coincide with that, and I was like,
funny.
What? And then you're reading through it, and you're like, oh, yeah, and he never likes his adaptations, but then the one he does is wacky and kind of goofy as opposed to super serious and scary, and he's a horror director or a horror guy, so
yeah.
But I already watched it, and I'll probably watch it again, but it's kind of fun that they also do a lot of blood and guts.
Yeah.
It's super gory from what I only ever watched it on Up All Night.
Oh, so you were like, hey, I don't remember that.
Yeah, so I'd never seen the not for TV version of it.
Oh.
And it's like bam, 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 bam. And you're like, wow, this is got a lot of gore in it for, a
Yeah.
80s, 70s movie.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. But yeah, so that's for patrons only. I think we're going to do it on camera. So if you want to watch us talk about this and as well as just listen to us talk about it, join our Patreon. Like I said, it'll be on the 26th. So yeah, come join us. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's our first sort of bonus episode of the year. And there will be a lot more. So definitely come join the party. All right, so let's talk about our plan for tonight. We're going to kick off the show with an in-depth conversation about Wolves of the Calla, Part 1, Todash, Chapter 7, Todash, Sections 1 through 8. Normally, we'd close out the show with a listener questioner, but oops. Like I said, I was very sick over the weekend, so I totally spaced it. But I do have a question that I will be asking at the end of this one for the next episode. All right, so before we get into all that, though, DJ, can you please let our listeners, new and old, know what our spoiler policy is here?
Like an important sign materializing in front of us where we're going to read it out loud and finally tell you the answers that you've been seeking. We will not tell you that answer and instead tell you that we are going to cross into the spoiler zone.
Hey. All right. Where did we last leave off with our content?
So the gang had just finished having the discussion with the town folks and basically showing off the fact that they can, in fact, shoot plates out of the air and catch those plates in their hands. Mm-hmm. They ate a great meal, and then they wander off back to their camp. And, that's where we pick up. Basically, we have kind of a vignette of them wandering away as they discuss some of the things that they've learned. One of the big things is actually the 65 gray horses. Mm-hmm. And Eddie's like, well, hey, man, is that normal? Because that doesn't seem normal to me. And like, Roland's like, it's not. That's super weird. Like, that is not a thing that is normal. And then he's like, but don't they raise horses? And he's like, yeah, they do. But, it's easier to just pretend like something doesn't exist than to like really think about it hard.
It just shows how scared they are, that they're like not even using their brains. They raise horses and they're not even thinking like, it's very strange that all of these horses are gray.
Yeah. And so we kind of get into this moment where Roland can kind of sense Eddie's frustration and irritation. And Roland, like, this is sort of a bonding moment too, where Roland is like, hey man, let it out. And like, Eddie's like, and like, runs his hands through his hair and like screaming, like, you feel better? And he's like, yeah, I feel better. And like, he's like, well, tell me what the heck is going on in there. And like, There's a moment where introspectively Roland's like, listen, this guy, like, at first, I didn't think of him as much, but over time I've realized that he shares a lot of characteristics with my former companions. And there's like a kind of moment where he's like thinking about it and he's like, there's not very many men that could really pull off fighting naked. And Eddie managed to just like rock that. And you're just like, oh yeah. And every time they bring that back up, you're like, man, that is pretty weird and badass.
Yeah.
Or just regular ass, because you're naked.
Or bare ass.
Yeah, exactly.
Badass bare ass.
And so Roland, like, actually at that moment you kind of get this this sort of like reliance and understanding that Roland has started to appreciate his quartet in ways that we haven't previously sort of seen before, and that he's actually like wants to know what Eddie's intuition is worth in this situation. Mm-hmm. And this isn't completely new. We've seen hints of this before, but this is the first time where, at least I can recall, that Stephen King was kind of like, and Roland really relies on this sort of thing from Eddie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I thought that was a pretty important thing to bring up.
Oh, yeah.
And so then Eddie's like, well, he's like, look at the sky. What do you see? And he's like, there's 19 up there, right there, He's like, everything's just, I don't know, it's 19. And Roland like looks into the sky and he's like, yeah, I actually do see that 19, but also I see a turtle and a chair or something. Like it's like kind of like a little goof random. And So then what we kind of come to understand is that Eddie wants to point out that the things don't feel legit and real.
Right.
And the description he gives is like, we came from the Emerald City. And it's actually kind of Stephen King almost like pointing out all the tropes that he's gathered up at this moment in a pretty calm and concise sort of way from a character who's experiencing said tropes. And so it's very interesting. And then you also get this reflection of Roland thinking about it as well, because Roland is like, my world ended with the previous place. And now here we see reflections of like the clothing choices, the style of life. And like, yeah, sure, rural life and ranching generally tends to reflect a certain cliche, but this is still very poignant. And so Eddie's like, we basically followed the Yellow Brick Road out of the Wizard of Oz, on this trail that takes us right to the place. There's, food basically growing naturally around us to feed us on the way. We get there and we get to a town where they have a problem and the strangers need to solve it. He's like, there's no doubt that when push comes to shove, the like blood and fighting and all that stuff that is going to happen will be real. There'll be real blood. There'll be real pain, real suffering. But it almost still feels like a director's cut of life.
Interesting.
And so this is just like this very poignant but on topic sort of description of all of this and like all of Stephen King's stuff. Now, I want to throw it to you because you got like 2 or 3 stars and I've kind of brazed over 3 sections in one fast thing. But
no worries.
Do you have research for me on any of this? Because I feel like you do.
You know me, I have some thoughts. So you've touched on something I think that is one of the most important takeaways from these first 2 sections, which is that we get this really great scene between Eddie and Roland that, aside from the exposition, which is really important, we also get this great check-in on sort of the state of their relationship and how it has evolved. And you see that it actually really has grown. There's this new sense of comfort and ease that they have on top of the kind of grudging respect that they previously, like there was this sort of tension between how they cared about each other and yet maybe they were not each other's cup of tea sort of thing before. Whereas now they're laughing and Eddie has this moment where he's just like, I really like it when Roland laughs. It's rare, but I really like it. And there's just this sort of like almost brotherly kind of vibe between the two of them that we have not really seen exist before, that Roland still acknowledges like, yes, like Bert, he is a ridiculous person, but he also has the same kind of affection for him that he had before. Not just grudging respect, but actual affection. And that's kind of great. They seem to kind of understand each other in ways that before they didn't. Like there's this moment where Eddie's thinking about where Roland kind of just shrugs something kind of awful off about like, if the people die, they die kind of thing. Or if we can't help them, we can't help them kind of shrug. Whereas in the past, Eddie's interpretation of that would be that, Roland is super callous and cold and he's like, long, tall and ugly, cold Roland, which is how he always perceived him leading up to this. But now he kind of has this moment of empathy for him where he's like, oh, he's just as trapped by his adherence to tradition and his duty as I was to heroin. Like that Roland in some ways is sort of powerless to his sense of duty, which is a very like magnanimous reading of what Roland is saying. And I don't think that Eddie would have been able to get to that place with him in the past. So I think there's some really great character moments in this first section. There's also another little hint that perhaps that Eddie is on to what's going on with Susanna. He's whittling again, but now Roland notices what he's making is like a child's toy. Yes, and something that we'll circle back to at the last section is like, how much does Eddie know? What is he seeing? How much does he know consciously versus or subconsciously? And I think this is sort of our first clue that even though Eddie hasn't said anything, he understands something is up with Susanna, even though maybe he hasn't even told himself that. So that I think is an important moment to touch on. So that's Eddie's side in the first section. And then in the second section, we get more of Roland's side, whereas he also is kind of contemplating his connection to to Eddie. And in this case, he's making all of these ties to Bert, which I think is kind of foreshadowing for a section that's coming up in this chapter, the like standout section that we'll be talking about in a little bit about Bert. And I think there is, I don't know. I don't want to get into spoilers, so I'll stop there. And then finally, we get a better idea of like the whole 19 thing. What exactly, like they were noticing coincidences, and it seemed kind of like they were having a little bit, like Eddie in particular was having a little bit of fun with it. They were all sharing Kef about 19 and laughing about it. But now it's kind of one of those things that maybe started off as like, oh, whoa, this is weird. And it's slowly becoming increasingly more ominous. And we now see that it's actually like really getting in Eddie's head, because he can't quite wrap his brain around like what is it that he's feeling about it. And ultimately it's that it feels like almost like things are happening not by fate, but by design. And like everything is a little too perfect. Everything is falling into a formula. Like if you think back to when they're outside of Lud and he's looking across the bridge and like hoping that in the city that they're going to come to some wise wizard who's going to help them. Like, and then of course that is not at all what happens in the city. It doesn't fall into the formula. Like he would have been comforted by formula. Now he knows enough about the world that the fact that suddenly everything is coincidentally lining up with sort of a narrative that is familiar to him, it's he understands that there's something wrong with that. And I think, you know, as full book readers, we kind of understand what's happening here, but I won't go into that because of spoiler territory. That there's some like intentional stuff that's happening in terms of like world manipulation, we'll just say. But yeah, so I think it's also interesting that on the heels of this conversation that we had last time about like, how does this world work? That here we are on the cusp of Thunderclap. And all we've been hearing about is that like, we're in the decline of civilization. There's nothing left. And then we come to these like picturesque rural areas and places of functioning industry. Yes, there's a freaking roller coaster town, you know, like how does this make sense? And why is it so weirdly in keeping with like traditional fantasy plot? I don't know. So those are I think important things that we're starting to kind of like tap into. It's also the first time that Roland starts to seem like maybe he's been blowing off this 19 thing, but he's starting to get a little sus, I think, in this conversation. And then I have one question for you, because I don't quite know if I understand what it means or not. But when he's talking about whether or not things are real, the one thing he doesn't feel that way is around Susanna. Do you think that's just meant to be like, oh, they have this really powerful connection? Or do you think there's more to it than that, like on a metaphysical level?
So this is an interesting question, and I thought a lot about this, and was actually going to circle back to it if you didn't bring it up, is basically that, so Susanna, because she's multiple people, and also like sort of Todash occupying multiple universes.
It's interesting. She's like a personal Todash.
Yeah, exactly. And so
that's interesting.
What it feels like is, at least to me, is that the reason that Susanna feels the most real to Eddie is because Susanna occupies the most worlds of any one of these folks. And so that like gives her personal space more gravitas. Mm-hmm. At least that's how I've kind of felt about it, especially since we've like got this "oh no, not again" thing going on, where it's like,
yeah,
now she can like jump planes of existence to go from one spot to another to go eat frogs in a non-existent swamp. You know, this is just I don't know. I think the extra answer is the dichotomy of evil Susanna and good Susanna.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a yin and yang thing. And like one of the things Stephen King loves to do is be like, well, here's a bad guy, but here's a good guy.
Yeah.
And like that's what completes a Stephen King universe. So having that in one person is also like, Maximum Overdrive. See what I did there?
Oh my god, I cannot wait to talk about that movie. We made you! We made you!
Yeah, that drunk lady is super fun. But yeah, I digress. So I don't know if that's the right take or if there is a right take on it, but that's how it sort of felt to me. Do you think it's like more of a love thing?
I mean, I think it's more of a love thing, and maybe it's somehow connected to this idea that like people are real even if the world isn't. But I don't totally understand it. I know that it kind of makes Roland uncomfortable, so I feel like there's more there. Maybe it'll kind of come out as we continue, but I don't know. It just
It's kind of weird that he
odd.
didn't like have Jake or Roland as the touchstone for that feeling. It was just Susanna. And like, yeah, I know, like they're
As his
fusking.
wifey.
Yeah, but I mean, like, is that the only reason? Because like they're all gunslingers and they share a kef, so
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. All right, let's move forward.
Okay, so now we get into some super reveals. We finally and this is kind of fun too, because we heard earlier when Roland was with the townsfolk, like, haven't heard about a gunslinger since Jericho Hill.
Oh,
And
God.
And Roland was like, I was there, hey. and then he just drops it and like we move on. And you're like, well, you can't just leave the iron hot. Like, I want to know what's going on here. Like,
right.
Tell me more.
Careful what you wish for, because it's about to be a bummer.
Yeah, exactly. And so we kind of fall into this situation where we wanted to know, and then you like slough it off for a bit, but then the payoff is here, sort of.
Yeah,
so
we get some answers. We get some really hard answers, but we get some answers.
So we kind of learn a little bit about what was going on. Like we come to find out that there's a big battle and there's a bunch of troops amassing and there's some smaller battles off and on. And what is basically painted for us is that all three of our young gunslingers are battling, and Land had the opportunity to leave, but he ends up observing a loss in the troops and comes back to tell Roland and Bert what happened. And the surprise of him coming back in the night, they accidentally shoot their friend and kill him, which is super dark. This is the first introduction to, I believe, of the horn, because I don't think it's mentioned anywhere else. And correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, and so we finally learn about this horn, and Bert's carrying it around. Says Roland, and couldn't play it nearly as good as him. But then we get this description of what's going on with Cuthbert. He's got like an eye bulging out of his socket. He's been shot who knows how many times.
Yeah,
and like he's in a bad way.
He's dying.
Yeah, exactly. And like Roland is still okay, but they have soldiers coming towards them, an entire troop of like 2,000 men. And even to the end, Bert's like kind of making light of it. Like, even after they shot their friend, they're in this dark place. Like, everything's going to hell in a handbasket. This is the end of the gunslingers as we know it. And Bert's like, he's like, all right, what are we doing, Roland?
I have the quote if you want.
Yeah, read it, because it's super, super dark, but also super, like, funny to the end.
Yes. Roland, he cries, we've been betrayed. We're outnumbered. Our backs are to the sea. We've got them right where we want them. Shall we charge? Oh my God, Bert.
And, like, Roland's, like, kind of plays into it. He's like, even if they try to surrender, we will not accept their surrender. All 2,000 of them must die.
Yep.
And it's
all right, Roland says hoarsely, looking around at these few remaining men. We're going into them. We will accept no quarter. Nope, no quarter. Absolutely none, Cuthbert says. We will not accept their surrender if offered. Under no circumstances, laughing harder than ever. Not even should all 2,000 of them lay down their arms. Now, then blow that fucking horn.
Yep. Yeah, and as they charge, like, Roland is remembering, like, holding his friend's hand for the last time and all the horrors of this event and thinking, like, this is it. You might as well just let me go now.
Yeah.
And like as it approaches, we're about to find out what this thing says, and cut to next scene.
Yeah. Oh my God, my heart. So like I roughly remembered that I knew that there was a tragedy at Jericho Hill. Like I knew that. But I didn't remember how it all went down. And I also because there was such a long time between Wizard and Glass and when I read this, the last, the one time I read this before, it had been so long that I did not have any real connection to any of Roland's, original quartet. This time through, it was so much more impactful because we just finished reading Wizard and Glass, and I'm still so in love with those characters. And so to hear, Jamie DeCurry, who we didn't get to really spend much time, but knowing they just got sniped, and then Elaine, they accidentally killed him, like sweet, sweet Elaine, and then Bert, oh God, laughing to the end and just like full of bullet holes and making jokes and writing to it like on out essentially on a suicide mission. Like you couldn't hope for a more like sort of like glorious Bert like end, but it freaking hurt this time. My heart, I was like, yeah, I mean I understand they're fictional characters, I'm gonna be okay, but it was still really, I don't know, it was really really sad, and it kind of broke my heart for Roland. But at the same time, I was like, well, the timing of these memories are a little upsetting considering the whole, like one of the major plots of this book is his gearing up for battle with his new quartet. And I'm like, I know King loves a good foreshadow, and I that's a little nervous making.
So let's talk about Jamie DeCurry for a second, because like we haven't really. This is fairly new character. Like, what do we know about this person?
Cool. So Jamie DeCurry was one of the members of Roland's first quartet. He joined after the events of Wizard and Glass. Sorry, I could not think of the name of that dang old book. So he basically was recruited by Court because he was really good with a bow and arrow. He was the son of a doctor in town. The reason you're not super familiar with him is he's only really mentioned in this book and in Little Sisters of Eluria, but he does have a larger role in the comics.
Okay, because I remember his name kind of being dropped once or twice previously, but like only as an aside to something else, and I was trying to like be like, wait, what is this guy about?
Yep. Nope. He's totally a character that is just mentioned and then has had his backstory like really fleshed out in the sort of, outside the books content.
Okay. Well, thanks for that heads up, because I do like to actually sort of familiarize myself with the back end characters, but like
there's
this
more
is, like,
of him in Wind in the Keyhole too. Wind through the Keyhole. Okay. Well, he'll come up in that too.
So like the stuff he shows up on is stuff that like I have never really tackled before.
Correct.
That's what you're telling me.
Yeah. The first time you ever heard about him was in Little Sisters of Eluria. We talked about him briefly in that. Then he shows up here. And then, like I said, we'll talk about him again when we get to Wind Through the Keyhole. And then when I know you and I have talked about tackling the comics potentially as like bonus content for Patreon, for like Patreon content. So we'll learn a lot more about him. Like, his whole background, like all his stuff. There's lots of stuff, but we'll get into it when we get there.
Bum, bum, bum.
Tease, tease, tease.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to point out when we're talking about this, like, this Wayback Machine is that, the horn, like Cuthbert tells him like, hey man, this is actually yours, and make sure that you pick it up if I fall because it rightfully belongs to you. And then like, we cut to Roland, who is so devastated by Cuthbert's fall that he like forgets anything about the horn and like moves on. And you're like,
he leaves it behind on Jericho Hill.
Face palm, no reason, done.
Yeah, this is a really well done and painful section. And I think I'm glad you mentioned the Horn of Eld, because I think that's something important that maybe will come up later. I don't know. We'll just like
table that.
We'll just underline it, just for future,
no
whatever. NBD. Okay. The other little moment here that I think is worth noting before we move on is that as Roland is being pulled out of the stream by the bells or the common Kamen, however you say it. He has this moment where he's reaching out and touching Cuthbert's hand, and he's just like, no, let me finish this. And it's interesting that in his sleep, in his most vulnerable place, in his most unguarded, the thing he wants is just like peace and to be done. So even though he's driven so hard to the Dark Tower, there's a part of him that would just, all he wants is for it to be over, which I thought was a kind of a dark but interesting moment.
Yeah, yeah, and like even as he's like waking up in this new Todash world, he's like still feels that hand on his own.
Oh, Cuthbert. All right, let's talk New York.
So Roland basically Todash is to New York, and like the hangers, he was about to read something that could be very important, and instead sees a sign that says "Don't walk," among other signs with like bright giant letters that are easy to read. And as Roland reads this, he realizes that the folks around him aren't really cognizant of the warning on the sign, and they're just like, I don't give a shit, I'm gonna cross the street regardless. To the point where like one guy just runs out in front of the taxi and flips the taxi off, and Roland, like, it's kind of fun because he's like, I don't know that that sign means what I think it means in this world.
Right. That made me giggle a little bit. I appreciated the joke after like the brutal last section when he's just like, I don't think that's friendly.
You almost get this panicked moment where like Roland thinks that he might have actually been the only one to Todash, and he thinks back to his own warning that he told everyone else, is that if you're the only one to Todash, stay put. And then that way you can get back, because they're supposed to, like, according to Andy the robot's warnings, like, you got to think hard about each other or you might not come back altogether. And so as Roland's like panicking, like, this is the scenario he did not plan for, which is him being the only one to Todash to this location. He turns around and he sees Susan barefoot with legs running towards him. And there's like an internal moment with Roland where it's like, I just had the like most horrible vision of everything that's happened to me. What would be the opposite of that would just, erase that from my consciousness? And it's like seeing the joy of Susanna, like calling at him and then running towards him with legs.
Yeah.
So she runs towards him, and Roland starts talking to her. She's like pretty marveled by the legs. He's like, we need to get you some shoes, girl. There's cut glass all over the place. And like,
I do not want to walk around any city barefoot, by the way.
Yeah. I mean,
Staph infection city.
Yes, all you need is all the animal feces that are on the ground that it can.
Bold
give
of you to assume it's animal.
Yeah,
someone has not been to San Francisco recently.
Oh no, I've had to tell Danny a few times, like, that is not dog stuff, that is people stuff, and we need to like go ways around because that's how you get E. coli. Anyway, so she's not wearing shoes. She's really excited about her legs. Roland's talking to her, and he slips and says Mia, and she doesn't even blink. Not even like upset or anything about it. And what we learn in this moment is that she was about to Mia off and go feed on stuff when she got toe dashed.
Mm-hmm.
And because that part of Susanna is a different conceptual part of Susanna than the regular Susanna, she came with legs.
Yeah.
And so basically what we come to understand is that Todash sort of takes into account what you actually believe in your heart of hearts. And
that's what I was curious that you were going to say, that when she's both women, the physical manifestation, she receives a physical manifestation of legs. It's not just mental. So I guess that answers my question. I was like, how does Todash work? Like, it basically, it materializes what's in your
what you believe to be true. Yeah, and so what we kind of got also is that like this Todash state is almost real, like almost, but not quite, because like people are still sort of like wandering around them, but not noticing them as they move around. And so it's like the closer they get to Black 13, the more powerful it is in transporting them there. And so that kind of shows in Susanna having legs, and Roland even slips, and he calls her Mia by accident, and she doesn't even bat an eye. Like, it doesn't phase her at all. She just looks to Roland for some like input on what they should do next. And as she's looking to Roland for this sort of like leadership role, we finally see that like Eddie, Jake, and Oi also made it, which is like a good positive. That means that the entire crew is here. And when they show up, it's like, oh, okay, well, what do you want to do first? And before that, he was hoping that Susanna could take them to where they needed to go. And she lets him know that, like, basically this isn't her New York. She doesn't recognize this New York because it is far different from the days of her stealing from Macy's and shoplifting. But that she could find her way around because the city is basically set up the same, and it hasn't changed. Avenues one way and streets the other. Yeah. So that's like kind of a cool thing. We also kind of, looking around the city, start to wonder if this is any of their New Yorks or a completely different New York.
So, okay, let's talk about Mia. We talked a little bit about my curiosity about how Todash works. But what's interesting here is, like you said, he calls her Mia, but she doesn't even blink. She doesn't even bat an eye. She doesn't even seem to notice. And he did it kind of half on mistake. Like maybe he caught himself and decided just to see how she would react. I'm trying to figure out what that means. Like that she's sort of in this sort of half place. And what's interesting is there is something different about her. And I was thinking about the way that she's acting. Yes, she's excited about the legs, but she seems incredibly un-Susanna in this moment. I don't know if you picked that up, but when she's like dancing around and hugging Roland, there's something kind of like girlish and uncool about her that I would never. You
sure this
really
isn't just the joy
Susanna
of like
as.
having legs again?
I mean, that's part of it, but the way that she's expressing the joy feels to me very un-Susanna.
I didn't pick up on that, so that's like kind of interesting, and I that's why I'm leaning into it. Is because like I thought it was just like I could do a little jig because I got legs again. Woo!
It's subtle, but like it's just I feel like I kind of know who Susanna is, and I can't really see that. I don't know, because there's this moment where Eddie looks at her. There's something off about her, even though he's not maybe fully consciously like admitting it to himself.
Yeah, she's like an inch taller than him now, and like he's a little embarrassed by it. Got short man syndrome.
But I think it's more than that. I think that's the point, is that there's something subtle happening, and I think the way that King is writing her in the same way, subtly different than the Susanna that we know. Like there's some there, but there's also something else there.
Yeah, I didn't pick that up, so I will keep an eye out for that in the future. Okay. But I mean, we basically know that it is not Susanna. So regardless of the writing style, like we're told like immediately, yep, that is definitely Mia.
Yeah. Maybe it's like, maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm just putting too much on it.
But I don't know. Like I didn't get enough from her in this little section to feel like I had that judgment. I just kind of chalked it up to joy.
I mean, think about her like running and throwing her arms around Roland. That just feels so un-Susanna to me. The other thing I think is really interesting in this section is she has this moment where she gets scared because she senses sort of like this lurking darkness. And it's something that was touched on, and we were trying to understand what it was the first time that Eddie and Jake went, and we get an explanation. And that is that they're traveling in Black 13.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really cool.
And like that feeling will get worse as they get closer to Black 13. The whole Susanna Mia thing, like, and Todash in general, I basically internalized it as being her personification of her self view. It's sort of like, I guess I went right to the Matrix with this, where like, you know, as soon as Neo goes into the Matrix, like he looks like regular Neo. And they're like, well, how did this happen? It's like, well, this is what you believe you look like. And so you do. And that's sort of what I thought, like, this Todash Black 13 did to her. But I don't know. Maybe that's incorrect. It just, if that's what it sort of felt like to me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah. I mean, that seems reasonable to me.
And when Eddie and Jake finally pull up to these guys, like, there's a couple of moments with Eddie where he's like, you can kind of tell he like feels like there might be something, but like doesn't really, address it. He just kind of is like, great, you look great, and then like we get another song reference where it's like, and you know how to move them or something like that. It's like is that ZZ Tops or something like that?
That's actually a great call. I forgot to write that in my notes, but yeah. So he references a ZZ Top song, which, if you recall,
was also
song,
yep.
Go ahead.
It was the song that they played, at the pubes.
Yes, it was the Sacrifice song.
Yep, and it's
Blood.
like, and that's kind of interesting. Like ZZ Top makes multiple appearances. Like I don't know, is there a connection? Stephen King worldwide that has to do with like ZZ Top in general, or is it just like he's like was in the mood for some ZZ Top at the time?
I mean, I think Stephen King fancies himself like a rock guy, because then we get into there's like multiple Rolling Stones references here too, where we get away from, or last time Jake was running down the street, he was thinking about he heard the Paint It Black song. And now he's hearing, what was it, 19?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the 19 song that they reference for the Rolling Stones, and I didn't know
19th Nervous Breakdown.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so basically, like, they start heading towards the store. Eddie and Jake like kind of talk to Roland. Roland's like, well, I'd really like to see the store, and then like I want to see the rose. And so as they wander over to the store, they look in and like realize that it's kind of sad. Like, it looks not abandoned, but not particularly well maintained. It's closed at the time, so the sign's not out. And internally, like, it doesn't feel the same as it did earlier. Like, it's slowly decomposing, which is putting it in the right state to be taken over by these gangsters. We also kind of get this one moment where we double back to that statement he made about how long he's been around. And it's since before Bob Dylan could play an E on his honer, I think is the statement. And so they're like, kind of like, well, what's a honer? And then it's like, well, that's actually a harmonica. And like, Bob Dylan used to hang around like Greenwich Village or something like that. And
yes.
And so that's like, oh, whoa, like, well, this guy's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And so that's a really like interesting callback to the earlier theories that the gang kind of proposed for how long this family has owned property in this area and so on. And it also kind of like puts a pin in the idea that we discussed earlier about how like he is a 3-generational person, where it's like you started poor, you worked your way up to rich, and now you're working your way back down to poor again.
Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
Yep, exactly. And so even though this is a short bit, it's like also super poignant. And then, we get kind of the mention again of Balazar. And like this kind of calls all the way back to the first bit where Eddie's like, this seems almost too convenient,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's this whole moment where they're like, I bet Aaron Deepno was in the same room. I bet Jack Donalini was working in the bar, because all these strange coincidences are happening. And this is kind of the first moment that you get that it's not just Eddie that's feeling this way, but also Susanna and Jake are sharing in this feeling of like, there are just too many coincidences. Like, this is just all lining up too cleanly.
Now, the other thing I wanted to point out, and this is, I've kind of skipped around a little bit, Rachel, so I'll throw it back to you to like pick up the pieces of my scatterbrain. But
That's okay.
There's a one of the things you mentioned, and I want to come back to, is that Susanna, now we know as Mia, is like feeling dark and uncomfortable. And while I don't disagree that part of that is probably the Black 13 that is helping him to go Todash, I also think as Mia, the approach to, because they're trying to get to the field where the rose was, like that approach is maybe weighing heavy on the less scrupulous, or maybe possibly mildly evil mom. Mia,
interesting.
That maybe sits a little bit less heavy on the shoulders of Roland and the rest of the crew, because like even when she mentions that, Roland is like, no, it's just night out. He like isn't feeling it nearly as hard.
She picks up on it more.
Yep, exactly. And like that almost to me felt a little vampire-y.
Vampire-y.
Well, not like vampire-y in the like she's a vampire. Vampire-y in the like, oh yeah, I don't want to walk into that church.
Oh, interesting.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, like it feels a little more like hollowed ground. That is very interesting. I had not occurred to me. The other thing is they find that newspaper, and I think that's kind of the most important takeaway.
Oh yeah, for Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan.
I know. But essentially what they discover is that time moves faster here than it does where they are. And what that creates is that sense of a ticking clock. Like they think they have a certain amount of time to resolve the situation in the Calla, but turns out actually they do not have that much time. They have less time than they thought, which is just a great way of King essentially turning up the tension screws a little bit, because he's got A plot and B plot going. So to remind you that as time sort of unfolds in our A plot, that the B plot is speeding along, whether they're getting there or not. So they need to hurry up and resolve this situation with the wolves, get the Black 13, and get over and start their little, multi-dimensional heist. And that time is not necessarily on their side. It's just good tension building, I think.
This one's kind of funny because like Roland's like, is it 2x? And like Eddie's like, no. It's more like 1.5x. And it's like, that's very precisely.
He hopes.
How do you know this? And then like, it's like, well, I'm not really actually even sure, like what? And that the joke I was alluding to is like, apparently like, Susanna thinks that like Eddie and Jake have been like co-opting to, or like, kind of planning,
co-conspiratorial.
Yeah, exactly. To tell her that like Reagan was president. She's like, I could see these other people like, haha, they could be president, wah wah wah, but like not this guy, what, that guy, ha. And like, and when that was going on, I'm like, oh man, if only that were true.
All right. So overall, what did you think of this chapter?
So this chapter is sort of just regular stuff, but with like a huge bomb drop in the middle that is like stuff that we've wanted to know about for a long time. And so overall that like, basically brings it up from like a 6 to a 9. It's like, well, if you didn't put that dress on, you'd be a 6, but you put that dress on and now you're a 9, or you put that suit on and now you're 9. And like that one little section is the suit. And you're just like, okay, you look good. Whatever you did there, that's nice. I like that. Do that again next time. And that's what I feel about this chapter. Rachel, what do you think?
I thought this chapter was really interesting. I have a feeling the second half is like where the plot and stuff is going to be stronger. But I do think this had some really great character moments, like the stuff at the beginning with Eddie and Roland I really enjoyed. And I do like the weird metaphysical stuff about what's happening with Susanna and how she's like mid-transformed. I'm really curious what that's going to look like as they continue on and they get to the lot. Like you were saying, maybe she won't react so well to getting near the rose. I don't know. I don't remember. So that's got my little wheels a spinning in the hamster wheel up here. The other thing I really loved was obviously loved is maybe not the right word. I appreciated and was heartbroken by the Jericho Hill stuff. It just, oh God.
You killed your own friend, man. We talked about
Elaine,
this. You don't do that.
R.I.P. It's so brutal. But yeah, overall, I think this was an interesting chapter, or interesting start to a chapter that I'm excited to see where it goes next. All right, cool. So for those of you who are playing along, next time we are going to be finishing this chapter. The reading is going to cover chapter 6, Todash, sections 9. Or sorry, is it chapter 6 or chapter 7? Sorry, chapter 7, Todash, sections 9 through 16. So we will wrap that up. I don't have any Stephen King universe connections for this one. There also really isn't any news.
I mean,
And
ZZ Top.
because well, we could all just vibe out to some ZZ Top if you want. And because I blew it and did not post a question, this is going to be a pretty short episode this time. But I do have a question for the next episode, and I will post this on the Facebook as well. Although you are happy if you are not on the Facebook to send us an email with your answer. The question is, because we're all still reeling from this Jericho Hill section in this part of the chapter, and you know we're in our feelings. We want to know from you, what was a death from a book that hit you the hardest outside of the Dark Tower, so we can avoid spoilers for the Dark Tower in case anybody dies, or maybe everybody lives and it's a happy ending. I don't know. No spoilers here. So what is a death from a book that when you look back on it hit you the hardest, and why? Dun dun dun. All right. So because, like I said, I blew it, that's kind of it for us. So if you want to get in touch with us, we would love to hear from you. You can answer this question. You can ask us a question. Actually, wait a minute. That's not true. I do have one email. I just remembered I have an email.
You have an email?
Okay. I do. We
got
an email. We do get email sometimes.
Interesting.
Okay, hold on. Let me pull this up. I almost blew this. Okay, so this email comes from Dave, and he says, "Hello, I am the one who volunteered my services for weapon information. King uses the term Docker's clutch to refer to a shoulder holster. It holds a handgun under the arm on the left side for a right-handed shooter, or the right side for a lefty. In the episode, you were describing a chest rig or a chest holster. These hold the gun across the chest and are usually used for hunting purposes. Butt handle of the gun faces left for left, right, and right for right-handed shooters. However, this is only my interpretation, as King is not very gun knowledgeable and commonly makes glaring mistakes, or takes liberties, if you prefer, with guns in particular. Thanks for remembering me, and sorry for my delayed response. I had a large backlog of pods to get through. Hope this helps. Thanks for all the insights and entertainment."
That's awesome.
Yes. That actually clears up a lot for me in terms of where I mean, I would imagine, like, a shoulder holster feels like so much easier to say than Docker's clutch. Why confuse me? So he did have one more note in here that's a little off topic, but I think is really interesting. He said, "It also might be of interest to let you know that I make music based on books and films. My music goes by the name of Night Surf. Let's see here. And the first record is available on all streaming platforms. This record is based on and around author Thomas Harris's Hannibal novels, as well as the films based on them. Musically, I call it desktop metal. Think Nine Inch Nail, Type O Negative, Deftones mixed in with narration and movie samples," which sounds like super badass.
Desktop metal, like I'm fine with that. That sounds interesting.
Well, you're also a musician. What do you think about that?
So I span the gamut of doing like happy jingles to like death metal to like punk stuff. So anything you do, like unless it's new country, I'm golden with you. So desktop metal, sign me up. I'll take a gander at whatever that is.
Awesome. So yeah, everybody should definitely check out Night Surf. Stream those things. Get into it. And thank you so much again, Dave. That was super, super helpful. I appreciate the clarification. And I'm guessing we'll have more gun questions for you in the future. So please stay with us. We're going to need you. So like Dave, if you want to get in touch with us, there are lots of ways that you can do that. You can email. The best one is probably just to go ahead and email us. Email us at castofcaw@zombiegrrlz.com, and that's GRRLZ.com. Or you can come chat with us over on the Cast of Caw Facebook group. We love talking to people over there. Or you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at ZG Podcasts, podcast plural, on Instagram and Twitter. And if you're loving the show, do us a huge favor and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that your pods. And if you're listening on Spotify, they now allow for star ratings. So please give us a good old 5-star rating on there if you are so inclined. And if you're looking for something spooky to watch tonight, you should check out our video on demand and streaming calendar on the Zombie Grrlz website, where we keep track of all the spooky doings that are on the stream of millions of streaming services and video on demand. And if you're looking for a new shirt or sweatshirt or a coffee mug or a magnet or whatever strikes your fancy, check out our merch at zombiegrrlz.com/merch. And finally, if you love us and you want to support us and you want to get some of that sweet, sweet bonus content that is coming your way, we're going to be doing live shows. We're going to be doing bonus episodes. We're going to be doing all kinds of stuff. We've got our Women in Horror Month big live extravaganza coming in March. DJ, are you excited for that?
Sure, whatever you tell me to do.
Are you boning up on all of your like lady in horror knowledge?
Despite being on one of the longest running horror themed podcasts on the internet, I spend very little time boning up on any movie related things at all. So I will take whatever assignments that are doled out to me and I will complete them.
Don't worry, there are some portions of the game that are going to be more creative, so I think that's where you're really going to have the opportunity to shine. So yeah, you're going to want to be a part of that. We have a lot of fun stuff planned. You can do that by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/zombiegrrlz. If you're a patron and you haven't joined the Discord yet, you should. We do all kinds of fun stuff on there. For instance, right after this, we're doing a group watch of the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. Which I think, based on the reviews, we might need community and solidarity to get through. We'll see. But yeah, so that's all the Patreon plugs. Obviously, every episode on the network is extended for patrons. For instance, we're going to be, again, talking about some very strange headlines on the extended today. And I think that's about it. So, DJ, if this is not enough and they're already patrons and they're like all that sweet, sweet bonus content and they need more DJ, where can they find you on the internet?
You can swing over to YouTube and go to classic videos. You can watch One Lone Dork or DSLR Film Noob. Those have a bunch of classic DJs running around doing stupid stuff. You can also swing over to Etsy and buy some garbage from me in the Muffin Spank store. And you can find me here on the Zombie Grrlz Podcast Network. Rachel, where can people find you?
You can find me obviously all over the Zombie Grrlz Podcast Network. You can find me on the Zombie Grrlz Prime, where we review horror films from a feminist perspective. In fact, the latest episode dropped today, and in terms of when we're recording, not when this is going to be out, so it would have been a few days. We reviewed Death Becomes Her and The Witches of Eastwick.
Oh, I love Death Becomes Her.
It's such a fun one, and it was like a first watch for a couple of people.
Oh, geez. That one's like a rare gem that, like, for some reason escaped a lot of people's popular radar, but it's so good, and, like, also plot-wise excellent, actor-wise excellent, like, just checks so many boxes with special effects, and, like, even back then did a really amazing job.
Yeah. Yep. I loved it. I had a ton of fun with it. And we had a really good conversation about it. So hopefully people will give that a listen. You can find me on the Stream Queens, where we review horror films from a feminine. No. You can find me on the Stream Queens, where we review horror films that you can find on the internet. Right now, the episode out is on the first Hellraiser film, which is we're doing a full rewatch of that full franchise over the course of this year. Exactly. You can find me on More Deadly, where we review films exclusively directed by female identified directors. And you can find me on the Untitled Nick Cage Show, where we are going through the entire back catalog of one national treasure, Nick Cage's career. Next episode coming out is Pig, which we did a little special like Oscar month episode about Pig, even though it didn't get nominated, which is some bullshit. And am I forgetting anything? I don't think so. More Deadly Stream. Is that everything? I think so. Yes. And then finally, like I said, I was on Trick or Treat Radio last night, and so you should definitely go check them out. And that, I think, is it. Yeah, that should be it. That's enough. You don't need any more of me in your life. I don't even want that much of me in my life. So I imagine that's gotta be enough. I guess unless people are sticking around for the extended episode, that is it for us. So DJ, take us out.
Now, I think folks at home, since we didn't really talk a lot about this during the cast, think for a moment the last time you were sick and imagine what kind of person you are. Are you a heaver or are you a projectile vomiter? If you're the second one, congratulations. We're friends. If you're the first one, I'm so sorry. That must be the worst experience ever. Good night.
Can we be friends if I'm a hybrid?
Yeah, we can still be friends.
Okay.
All the way across the puking board. I'm not actually excluding any of you out there from your vomiting pleasures. You just do you.
Pleasures. Good night. Bye, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and to my co-host DJ for making me laugh and for indulging all of my tinfoil hat conspiracies. Production on this episode was done by yours truly. Our theme song for the show was created by DJ. All right, let's get into this bad boy. What do you say?
All right, this is the behind the scenes?
Yeah.
Are we talking about puke? Or are we?
I mean, we can if you want. I'm going to probably save that for the bonus episode. Okay, so hello, everyone, and welcome to the extended episode where I find these stories to be interesting, and then DG's like, "Oh yeah, I know about that."
wait, are we okay? We're doing that again. All right. Well, let's
Is
roll.
that okay?
Then. Yeah. I
Okay.
Don't know
Okay.
what we're
Cool.
doing.
All right.
So, here.
So, all right. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Ticks are now being modified using CRISPR to end Lyme disease.
Yeah. Same thing they're actually doing with mosquitoes in South America.
Is that right?
Yeah. The ticks, it's different. Like, obviously, mosquitoes don't carry Lyme disease. But with mosquitoes, they use CRISPR to create a genetically sterile mosquito 3 generations in. So they can release a bunch of mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes will kill off the other ones. The Lyme disease, though, is extra interesting because are you familiar with alpha-gal?
No.
Okay, so the tick bites, specifically, I think deer ticks. I might be wrong. Someone fact check this. When they bite you and you get the disease that the tick is carrying, it can make some people allergic to red meat.
Oh, interesting.
And so that actually circles all the way back around to the transplant of a pig's heart into a person.
Okay.
So if you remember recently, also in the news, is they transplanted a pig's heart into a person. Well, the reason that pigs' hearts wouldn't work in a human normally or other organs is because humans reject a high alpha-gal concentrates. And so the information that are gathered from the people that got this immune deficiency to be allergic to meat, they were able to use that information to genetically engineer pigs to not produce that particular thing so that you would not be rejecting the heart that you got from an animal.
Right.
And it all leads back to ticks.
Wild.
Yeah. But tell me the story, because
okay,
that's
let me
cool.
give you the background for people who don't know, and then you can weigh in on it. All right, so scientists from the University of Maryland and Penn State University think that they have struck gold in their effort to eradicate our friend Matt's greatest nemesis, Lyme disease, because he's the most afraid of ticks of anyone I have ever met in my life. Okay. They were able to get around the natural measures that allow ticks' eggs to be nearly impervious to the process needed to modify the genes before they hatched. They used CRISPR gene editing technology, which I just learned what that was. I thought the CRISPR was an actual literal machine.
Like you put them in like a cooler and cool them off.
I didn't know. I thought it was like a nanobot
like
or
we
something, and it would like
like
go in and
lettuce.
like turn on its little laser cutter and be like, I didn't know that it was like machine meant. I didn't understand the definition of machine did not include actual like literal
Nanobots.
machines. Yeah, exactly. So, but that's a whole side thing. Their next step will be to determine which genes are associated with a tick's ability to transmit pathogens, and similar efforts, like you said, are being used to end malaria by mosquitoes. There's no time frame currently for when we'll see these billions of modified ticks released to upgrade the gene pool, and what could possibly go wrong with that?
Yeah, and actually that's the key underlying statement here for both the mosquitoes and the tick applications. So for the mosquitoes, the one thing is eliminating a bunch of mosquitoes. or a certain type of
Mhm.
mosquito, and what impact that might have on their feeding or whatever feeds on them. And the ticks are
Mhm.
the same way. Like if you genetically re-engineer a tick to not carry something, does that have an effect on the thing that eats the tick?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess we don't know, right?
Yeah,
Like
and
we're
like the problem with biological experiments like this is like you can't take it back once you kick it out the door because
right.
nature finds a way.
Yeah. Now we're getting into like I Am Legend territory.
Yep. Like the tick zombie apocalypse.